Good day, everybody. My name is Randy Resnick. I am extremely pleased to moderate this panel. The panel is going to be talking about OT in the U.S. federal government. Title is Applying Zero Trust to Operational Technology and Critical Infrastructure within the U.S. federal government. So I'd like to introduce who the panel members are. For DoD, can you individually introduce yourself, and then we'll get into the questions? DoD.
Good morning, sir. My name is Colonel Gary Kipe, and I am the acting director for the Zero Trust Portfolio Management Office for the DoD. I actually have the esteemed honor to work under the leadership of our moderator today. So, sir, good to see you.
Thank you. Long time no see.
Yes,
CISA.
Hello, everyone. My name is Danielle Jablansky, and I serve in the Office of the Technical Director at CISA, which sits across all of the Cybersecurity Directorate, and I advise on industrial control system strategy and subject matter. Thanks.
Excellent. DOE and DU.
Thank you so much for having me here today. I am Dr. Amy Hamilton. I am on detail from the Department of Energy to the National Defense University College of Information Cyberspace. One of the courses that I teach is the critical infrastructure. And it is just such an important area, and I'm really glad that we're focusing on this today.
Important topic. And lastly, the Office of National Cyber Director, Executive Office of the President.
Thanks, Randy. Thank you all for having me today and inviting me here to speak. I am Lisa Barr. I am the Deputy Assistant National Cyber Director for Federal Cybersecurity within the Office of the National Cyber Director. There's a lot there. For those that aren't aware, our office was established in 2021 through the National Defense Authorization Act of 2021, and we sit within the EOP, and my role is focusing on sort of all the U.S. government cybersecurity. So really excited to be here today, excited to be here with all of you, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Great. So folks could see that we have a really wonderful and deeply subject matter expertise oriented panel, hoping that we can get a lot out of the questions that are going to be asked. It's a great representation across the DoD, the entire federal government, FedCiv, CISA, etc. So let's get on it. So let me start off with Colonel Kipe. So for Colonel Kipe, ZT relies on integrating various pillars of zero trust into a cohesive whole, this integrated whole, and we're all about outcomes. So can you tell us how vendors can help accelerate critical infrastructure OT within all of our organizations and our organization missions so that we could reach a high level of maturity in OT for zero trust in those areas?
you bet. This is a great way to start a conference like this, because it really gets to the heart of how the vendor community can come alongside the FedCiv and certainly within the DoD. We recognize that a lot of the vendors out there have served in uniform. They're already committed. They're patriots just like we are. And this is one way that they can really come alongside and help us to achieve a common mission. And there's really several areas that vendors are particularly equipped to help the DoD with regards to integration and coherency of zero trust. You have the experience and the skill sets to develop the doctrine that helps us to fight and defend. You have the know-how to how to organize our forces, and particularly for future cyber defense. You can help us train and prepare the force for future fights. You can help us develop the hardware and the software material solutions that we don't have right now, but that we need, that we can't build, but that you can build for us. You also have a unique skill set with helping us to know how to refit and retool facilities for cyber defenses and to adapt our policies across the DoD and beyond to the entire USG, so that we can incrementally move from a network-centric network-centric effort to a data-centric cybersecurity model. In other words, the DoD has given a clear demand signal of what we're trying to achieve, in our case, by the end of FY27. But I hope that we have equally given the demand signal that we need help, and a lot of that help has to come from without. And we believe that that vendors in particular can help us meet the challenges before us that are principally not technology, oriented, but a culture problem. We are trying to solve a not a technology problem, but a culture problem regarding cybersecurity. And the vendor community has already been through a lot of transitions over the course of their many years in service, and now they're particularly suited to help us to overcome the .MLPF kind of efforts that we need in the DoD and across the USG.
Thank you, Colonel Kipe. I think it's very fair to say that OT is very nuanced, and really we need the public-private partnership between the government and the vendor community to solve this problem. It's a big, big challenge, equal or bigger challenge, and even the IT pieces of Zero Trust. Okay, so Lisa, OMB put out M2209. I don't know if the word is expired or sunset, but it's essentially run its course. I'd like to know if you could share with us your opinion from an agency point of view on whether or not it was seen as successful. We would like to know what's next, if there is a next. Despite the 2209, you always wish you go back and maybe you could have added things or said things differently. Are there any gaps that you see that were maybe missed that need to be addressed going forward?
Thanks, Randy, for the question. As you well know, Zero Trust is definitely, it's a long journey. Especially with large, complex, and diverse information technology environments such as federal agencies broadly. And I'll answer broadly, not specifically within like a federal agency. I think we started this journey in terms of the policy space in 2021, 2022 with the release of the Cybersecurity Executive Order 14028, and then OMB released its Federal Zero Trust Strategy. And then you all with DoD also released your Zero Trust Architecture Strategy, I think around November or so of the same year. What we're seeing is that, and I think we're saying sort of like sunsetting of the Federal Zero Trust Strategy, but that really was a foundational document that set out sort of 3-year goals to kind of build the foundation for federal departments and agencies across the board. With that sort of, I don't want to say drawing to a close, because again, while the memo itself sort of set the 3-year time horizon, it's not as if things are stopping, right? We're continuing to press departments and agencies to move forward. I mean, there's tons of work that you all are doing with overlays and looking at OT and all these things, right? It doesn't end just because a policy sort of sets. It was more the push to get agencies moving. And we've seen a lot of successes, actually. We are seeing significant cultural change with departments and agencies. There's a clear adoption of Zero Trust as a mindset, thinking through how do we ensure that the users, the data, the information are defensible, and that we're making it harder for our adversaries to get that data. But they've made substantial progress, especially when, we can see this through some of the PfMO data that OMB collects. And, there's things that clearly there's been a strong focus on multi-factor authentication, phishing resistant encryption. Like those have been a lot of the core underpinning elements of Zero Trust. How that sort of translates to OT, I'm very interested in hoping that we kind of talk through some of that, because I don't think they translate quite as well to that environment when we start thinking about those things. I would say that not necessarily a gap, but a continued area of focus is this, we're not taking our foot off the gas. We're keeping the pressure on. And there's one area of great interest. It is this area of looking at how we apply Zero Trust to OT environments and what that starts to look like as we go forward. So I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to hear what all the other panelists have to say about Zero Trust and OT. But I'm excited for where we are in this journey and kind of where we are going over the next several years.
Thank you, Lisa. I could tell you from a DoD perspective, your office and CISA, which is my next question, has championed Zero Trust so much. I have seen such a dramatic change in the FedCiv community when it comes to cybersecurity and Zero Trust specifically, and I've seen how important the M2209 was to really get people moving. I love the word bold in the EO 14028. I love that word, because I've never seen that word before really used in the federal government, and yet it says it in that document. And so I have seen bold moves with OMB leadership in Zero Trust. And just like you said, we've only just started. So thank you very much. Daniel, I'd like to get to you. CISA has a huge role in cybersecurity in this space. So can you talk a little bit about how CISA saw M2209, how you promoted it, and how you, to Colonel Kipe's point, attempted to change the culture of cybersecurity of the past into the new mindset of Zero Trust going forward?
Of course. And as you mentioned, CISA continues to champion Zero Trust principles and priorities, but any security program in any federal agency is a puzzle of many pieces. So a couple of those pieces that I would like to highlight are first the CISA CPGs, which don't get a lot of play actually in the Zero Trust conversation. But the reason I think it's important is because they do outline compensating controls that limit cascading failures. And that's what we want to see across OT and ICS. And there's many ways to approach the CPGs, which you could align with your Zero Trust strategies and principles and priorities. And that is by scope, cost, impact, and complexity. And I don't see a lot of tools out there that are that malleable to actually conform to other strategies and priorities. So that's one. Another is an internal and external working group and community of interest we have around Zero Trust. It's actually been convening for more than a year. We just happened to have the latest meeting yesterday. And on that agenda were things like the Protective DNS program for CISA, how that works in with Zero Trust, tools incorporation and implementation, things like Cribble and Splunk. And there was a long discussion about log retention and policy discussions, which are absolutely paramount to Zero Trust. And then for ICS and OT, we also discussed in that meeting yesterday, my colleague presented on the main drivers for this sector, which include the authentication challenges and principles, patching constraints, resource and personnel constraints, reliance on end-of-life software and legacy technologies, and then, of course, some of the more bespoke layer one kind of protocol and serial connectivity implementation. And then lastly, I'll mention a lot of our federal agencies are, of course, familiar with our work on high-value assets. So across the federal civilian executive branch agencies, we continue to focus on mission critical and essential functions, similar to the 62443 standard. But we are also emphasizing now how we direct the prioritization of resources, services, products, and facilities to capture OT and ICS in terms of interdependence and reliance. And I think that that is hugely important. We're working across agencies to share anonymous examples of SCADA and similar systems that have actually been considered a high value asset and why, and helping to refine those definitions of criticality so that we don't also boil the ocean, so that every single component and redundancy now becomes a high value asset. That's not what we want to see. We actually want to build resilience. And the last thing I'll say is building resilience for OT and ICS is defined as the ability to operate under compromise, right? Not the ability to recover from an incident. And that's something we also continue to emphasize when we talk about OT and ICS specifically.
Danielle, you have a unbelievably hard job. So let me just, if I can, have a follow-up on this. You're doing a lot of work with teams of teams. In the end, do you envision sooner rather than later any guidance coming out from CISA in the OT world, ICS world, with regard to how to step through some of this directions towards Zero Trust? And is it being well received in industry and in the government on what your guidance has been to date?
So we see plenty of guidance on Zero Trust maturity models and kind of, strategic approaches. What we want to do is help to enable stakeholders and critical infrastructure asset owners, essentially, as well as FSEB, right? So we've already kind of made our footprint across FSEB. We're kind of moving that emphasis to those critical infrastructure owners and operators across the country and helping them to incorporate existing guidance. So there is some new work around IoT and Zero Trust and secure by design or secure by demand principles and working with Zero Trust. Really, that aligns more to supply chain risk and criticality, kind of like we were talking about, doing some of that crown jewel analysis. How do you start? How do you make sure that you're not overwhelmed by your own procedures? And then when it comes to OT, we really actually need to focus on all of these touch points from IT. So of course, IT has always been an intermediary to the OT, but now we're seeing kind of additional touch points, additional business functionality, and we're also seeing additional promises from security vendors in the OT space that they can extend to that really need to be thoroughly vetted. So all that is important in your strategy, but I don't think that it would really benefit us to write a new strategy or a new kind of guiding principle. We really want to work arm in arm with those owners and operators to distill and discern what they need to focus on. And that's really our focus going forward, that enablement.
Right. And it's encouraging to see OT vendors really getting excited in this area. because finally, I would say somebody might be listening to them, and this is really, really important. We've seen it across our country with ransomware and such. That's just things that are happening. But imagine what could happen in OT. Let me change subjects. I want to talk about training and upskilling, which is a common theme across all of us on this panel. So I'll start off with Amy. Amy, what are your thoughts on the need to upscale the DoD and the interagency community, the workforce, as well as train the existing talent that we have in the DoD and the interagency that really needs to learn almost a new subject, which is OT, because almost everybody that has been in the government to date has been focused on IT.
Randy, thank you so much for that question. And I think there's a few nuances to it. And when I was at the Department of Energy and M2209 first came out, we kind of looked at it from that people, process, technology aspect. And one of the key things we looked at is it's easy to talk about the technology. The people are hard. And we recognized that we didn't have a lot of people trained in zero trust at the department at that time. And so we immediately set out to make sure that we had at least one person at each one of our sites trained on zero trust. And at the time, there were only 2 providers really providing zero trust training. What we've seen is that it has fundamentally changed. There are many more commercial providers, as well as right now the Department of Defense Acquisition University created a number of CBTs at different levels. And so we've really seen just the training for zero trust when it comes to an IT environment proliferate over the past few years. The other thing that we've seen is this understanding finally of the need to protect operational technology. And unfortunately, as we look at Schneider Electric in France just got compromised with ransomware, it highlights over and over again, we have to start looking at our operational technology differently. When I first started teaching critical infrastructure, you taught the Purdue model. The Purdue model seemed to work. It worked for decades, and we were all fairly happy in the OT community, thinking that this would continue to protect us. As technology has changed, as the technology integration has changed, what we have found is this does not work anymore. And so we're really relying more and more on NIST guidance, which was just recently updated again, and the NIST SP 800-82 Rev 3 on operational technology, particularly related to zero trust. Danielle recently was part of a standards group in the ISA GCA on zero trust and operational technology and ICS. And so we really need to look at our traditional OT providers, which Idaho National Laboratories has done amazing training for years. And how do we combine these? How do we make these into, how do you put the peanut butter and the chocolate together to get people to understand this? And as we've reached out to our OT community, and we've said to them, like, as you're building this, you need to look at, cyber physical systems, cyber, engineering by design. And what we really found is some pushback from the engineering community. And one of the stories is that at one of the labs, they were working on a project, and we as the cyber people said, well, what are you doing when it comes to cyber? And they were like, this is not going to be connected to the network. And we're like, well, we've had many analog technologies that were never designed to be connected to the network that are now connected to the network. And it has to be this concept that it's not necessarily that you're planning on it being connected to the network, but it's very rare for something to be truly air-gapped anymore. And even when it is air-gapped, if you have a USB device, that USB device could be compromised. I mean, it's so hard to maintain a clean and completely separate environment. And you need to just go in with the principle that this will be connected. And then we need to train the force to understand that whether it's the acquisition community forces and training them when you purchase something, do you understand the cyber principles behind it? And then our strategic leaders, it needs to be the strategic, the operational, and the tactical. It's interesting. A lot of times I'm still seeing people, when it comes to the, joint forces saying, hey, you know what, we're going to focus on how to do these exercises, how to do these operations. They're not considering the cyber aspect still. I don't need somebody to blow up a dam. What I need somebody to do is disable that dam, and it could be through a means of cyber, which could be easier. Truly understanding the integration of all these things has to come together in our education and training for our workforce across DoD and the interagency.
Right. I laugh when you said one part of your answer. Your answer was great, but one part of it has to do with the air gap. I can't tell you how many times we have heard that story. And of course, zero trust assumes the adversary is already in your system, which includes, by definition, an insider. So air gapping doesn't do anything in that regard. So that's a culture thing. It's really a mindset change because people have been trained. Oh, I'm not connected to the internet. I must be safe. And ZT blows that away. It assumes the worst case. So I love your answer. Colonel Kite, I'll ask the question kind of the same, but I want to zero in specifically on the DoD. I'd like to know, in your opinion, if the DoD has any unique challenges to upskill the workforce for zero trust, or do you see it as merely the same challenge that really covers across the entire U.S. federal government?
Yeah, so I do think that we are unique in some regards, but we all have the same mission. That's defending our data in kind of the same complex environment that we're in, where data is increasingly expected to be more readily available, more reliable. We have a number of systems that are all dependent upon data. There is no sense of a gap system, because to your point here, in our panelists, my peers, we all recognize that data is expected to be more ubiquitous, not less so. The Internet of Things and the convenience, ease, speed, reliability of it is going to increasingly become an expectation, not just for the way we live, but also the way we fight and defend ourselves. Our adversaries are certainly going to try to exploit those technology gaps. So we all have that same kind of problem set. The DoD is unique, specifically regarding our force. The DoD has about 75,000 civilians, about 25,000 troops, and about 75,000 contractors that are committed to our cyber defense. That's it. That's all we've got. And so, as our audience here might expect, our demand has already exceeded our supply. Last year, there were about 28,000 unfilled military and civilian cyber roles. So we already had a short number, and we're 28,000 short of that. The need going forward is going to increase, not decrease. So I don't think this is unique to the DoD, but this is certainly a DoD problem. We don't have enough talented people. And so one curt answer might be just, we'll rely on AI. But I honestly don't think that AI is a solution. It could be a useful tool. I think AI is going to have a valuable role in the future. But if we think of zero trust being culturally, primarily a culture problem and not a technology problem, AI is not going to solve the culture. AI is not a response to a culture change. AI is a tool towards that, but it's really the way we think about our own cyber defenses and the integration of the things that we're using in the defense of the data that we depend on. The DoD is not unique in that, but we're trying to address that problem first in micro, in our own sphere, but not outside of being mindful of the rest of the USG, with whom we have to integrate to defend national security, and also beyond that with our foreign allies, with whom we have to depend on and work with in order to maintain global commerce and security. So I think of our problem kind of in a small way, DoD, but it's not separate or air gapped, if you will, from the rest of the DoD or the USG cybersecurity problem set.
So for the record, I think this is really important that we get on the record, or at least ask if other agencies of the federal government have unique requirements, because I originally thought that it kind of is, a common thing across in the most general sense. It sounds like DoD, there is some unique things, but I'm also hearing from you, it's still a skills gap and a culture change.
Yes, sir.
So Lisa, I'll start with you, and then lastly, I'll ask Danielle. So Lisa, do you see upskilling as a common challenge from your vantage point, or do you see some unique things in your space?
So I think my boss, our director, often quotes this number. He says there are roughly 500,000 open, unfilled cybersecurity positions across the federal enterprise, I believe, currently. Colonel Pike highlighted the gaps you have within DoD. I mean, it's across the board. I think we have to find multiple ways to address this with people. There is the upskilling that needs to be done. And there needs to be the reskilling, perhaps, too, of existing federal employees and staff that can fill the gaps. I do think that those are areas where we should focus. But then we also, again, sort of to Colonel Kipe's point, we don't seem to have the supply to meet the demand. Our office has made a significant push to try and reach more rural communities, to try and bypass some of these things, to be able to emphasize, look, you don't need a degree to come into cybersecurity. It's not a requirement. You can do certifications. There's multiple ways to get access and come in. And these are good paying jobs. We just have to start getting more and more people to them. What we try to think through is how do we access some of those more rural environments or other areas of the country maybe that aren't in our traditional like talent pool, and bring those people to the table and bring them into the government. The government isn't always the sexiest place to come and work. So one of the common themes that I often hear from federal agencies that, they can't compete with the private sector for jobs. They can't compete in pay, time, that sort of things. One of the things we do have is flexibility in the government. There are a lot of options. I think work-life balance is a huge benefit that we try and push to bring talent to the table and say, there are flexibilities here. Come and work with us. Come and work with us. There's tons of openings. There's tons of opportunities. So it's not just an upskilling thing. It is also continuing to sort of like fill the pipeline. We need to start reaching more and more people younger to bring them into the workplace and kind of get them excited about not only zero trust, but cybersecurity generally.
Right. Danielle, any thoughts?
Well, as someone who did leave the private sector for government, I can tell you that it is doable. And even when I worked in Silicon Valley before private sector, I was at Stanford, and we actually did a lot of work around what did drive some of the private sector folks to go work for the government, and it was all mission oriented. So I think the bigger gap is actually around defining responsibilities. People are passionate and interesting. OT systems are incredibly interesting to learn about. I actually teach a community college class on Intro to ICS Cybersecurity because it is such a fun thing to learn and to teach. But those opportunities are far and few between for affordable and ubiquitous access to this area of coverage. But I really think when it comes down to responsibilities, that's a leadership thing that needs to be outlined. So if you can outline those responsibilities and then translate that to the mission, you will see more recruitment. But then also the drivers of how you assign responsibility for zero trust, especially within OT and ICS, come down to cost benefit consideration. So the paper that Dr. Hamilton mentioned that I co-authored with the Industrial Society of Automation actually puts this into the framework of cost benefit considerations, because yes, we all share some of the same concerns. We don't share the same mission criticality, infrastructure, tools, and reliability. And those are the things you need to outline responsibilities for when you do reasoning, implementation, and management of any security control and procedure. So when you break it down that way, of course, there's never going to be a one-size-fits-all approach or commercial off-the-shelf product. But if you look at those 5 key steps for applying zero trust, which are outlined in that ISA paper, these things are things that people know how to do, right? They're not. It's not anything that requires a completely reconceptualizing how you think about what's important. It actually requires how you own your own responsibilities and how those responsibilities are articulated from your leadership. So it's a big problem, but I think we can do it.
So if I could add just for 1 minute, your example of coming from industry into the government is so interesting because it is the mission. You have certain mission and mission topics here in the government that you just simply will never have in industry, and vice versa. But the challenge problems are so amazingly different and interesting. And sometimes you get into a 007 type of office that, it's just amazing the dynamics of what goes on. So sinking your teeth into something that is really challenging in cybersecurity, defensive cybersecurity in the government, great need, but there's also great challenges, and they're really great. They're the biggest challenges that industry will never see because the numbers are so different, and the impact is a magnitude different if you get it wrong. Okay, so I want to go into like a next phase, challenges. I want to basically ask everybody what challenges, we have EO 14028, we have M2209, who knows what we'll have in the future. We talked about training, but in the end, we all have challenges, and probably we all have unique challenges, but also common challenges. So briefly, can you give us the wave tops of what the challenges are that you see right now, that you're working on right now, that you're going to focus on in the next 12 months right now? So I'll start off, let's choose Lisa.
So I will tell you what I hear from federal agencies and for the FedCiv community, and it probably resonates within DoD as well. But there's two challenges that we hear frequently. One is we don't have enough resources, don't have money to do the things that you're asking us to do, and we don't have the technical talent in order to kind of meet the technical capacity that we need in order to deploy zero trust capabilities. Some agencies struggle also with leadership buy-in, so they don't necessarily have the top down from their executive down. So again, I still go back to some of the cultural changes that while we're seeing some, we still seem to lack an executive level buy-in within some agencies, not all, to really kind of push to understand and really focus on zero trust and focus on cybersecurity. And that's always amazing to me because I think so much of the work that we do underpins the ability for agencies to get their mission done, and that gap in awareness of the IT systems and things that you rely upon, if those things go away or you can't access them, how do you still accomplish your mission?
Exactly.
We have tried over the course of several years through joint priority memos between ONCD and OMB to push for more funding through the president's budget. I know that OMB has asked for this over and over again, but we're in a constrained resource environment. I don't think that that's going to change. Hard to say under the next administration. But if there's no new money, what do we do? And how do we continue to operate? And how do we continue to do all of these things? And what we see is that agencies are, again, some have established PMOs, for ZT, but others are just, they are upskilling their existing staff. And CISO offices, you see, it's a mind shift, right? They have to deploy zero trust. They have to think about how did we defend our systems? We know an adversary is in here, so what are the capabilities that we need to put in place? Right? They see it almost, this is a natural part of the work they have to do to defend those systems themselves. And I think that's what we start to see, and that's what we have to keep pushing for more and more is don't take your foot off the gas, keep going, leverage what you have, recognize that there are mechanisms out there. There's the Technology Modernization Fund. There's other ways that we can sort of look at sort of filling some of the gaps. And we have to know what those gaps are to be able to look to how do we fill them.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Danielle, any thoughts?
I have a couple. So I think that the biggest gap we're actually seeing from CISA and with end users that actually have to consider what their security decisions mean in terms of ramifications across their networks is actually contextual application. And so this used to be a threat likelihood problem, like what's the likelihood I'll be targeted or my system will be targeted or my mission will be targeted. And so you see organizations ask for that threat modeling and attack pattern that's going to tell them exactly what steps the kill chain is going to do from some adversary based on capabilities or based on vulnerabilities to impact them. We have to throw that thinking kind of out the window. And that is a leadership problem, as Deputy Assistant Director Barr mentioned, but that leadership problem is still relying on risk registers and point solutions. And we're never going to get away from point solutions, but things like zero trust and developing that strategic implementation can actually help to do a couple of things. And that is provide organizations with the potential to identify or eradicate malicious actors and activities before lateral movement and privilege escalation, which should be the bottom line of every program across the board, regardless of your mission or your infrastructure. And that, which I love to talk about in zero trust conversations, should lead to a reduction in overall dwell time and a reduction in the potential severity of any cyber incident. And those are the things I underscore. So it is a leadership problem, but it's also a contextual problem of nobody can understand every potential attack pattern that may impact them. But everyone can understand the strategic priorities that they need to do those couple of things, right? Eradicate behaviors before they are too deeply ingrained in your networks, and to reduce the overall severity of any potential impact to your mission or your essential functions, rather than trying to prepare for every new tactic, technique, or procedure we see in the wild.
Right, right. Those are great metrics to collect because those would give that to you. Colonel Kipe, any thoughts?
Oh, so many. So I've got two big challenges I'm going to give. One is technology that we're looking at overcoming over the next 12 months. And that's regarding data tagging and labeling. We have a data-centric strategy, but heretofore we haven't had a data tagging standard or something like it. So expect the vendor community and the rest of us to be looking for some advancements, so movement on that in the next 12 months. We also need to have movement in ICAM, RBAC, ABAC. These are important if we're going to achieve zero trust across the DoD and beyond. But I'm actually pretty hopeful because my peers here, the panelists, we all recognize limited resources, and oftentimes we think in terms of money and people. This is true, but another limited resource we have is time, because we're not just trying to build a better mousetrap, where if we do it, we get an A in class, and if we don't, we get a C in class, and it doesn't really matter. We're actually trying to defend something we love, our country. We're trying to defend our way of life. And I think all of us increasingly understand that we can't preserve this way of life for ourselves and for our children if we can't defend our data. So for all the vendors that are listening here, I actually think you have a tremendous opportunity because you're more agile than the federal government. You just need some direction. We've given you the direction. We need to achieve zero trust within the DoD by the end of FY27. So your prep time has started. We need for you to come up with creative solutions to a problem set that we can't solve by ourselves. You're more agile than we are. You can come up with the solutions. And you have an incentive to protect your intellectual property, which means you need to adapt zero trust for yourself first so that it can't be stolen, and then find other vendors to work with to fill your own gaps to give us solutions. And this is not a pie in the sky ask that we've presented. So just recently, we've got a success story with Department of the Navy's Flank Speed. It's a cloud service, just passed a rigorous validation of the Department of the Navy's IL5, unclassified Microsoft Azure and Microsoft 365 cloud implementation. They hit it out of the park. They didn't just barely win, they crushed it. They achieved full compliance of 91 target activities, which is the DoD's goal by the end of FY27. They've done it in 2024. Okay, and not only that, they also met 60 of 61 advanced activities. So we're not asking for the impossible, we're asking for something hard. But if we have limited resources in terms of time and people, I would urge each of you to recognize a greater limited resource, and that is time. We cannot fail on this. And I would also submit to you that we cannot win without a robust, vigorous vendor community supplying us with some practical options going forward. So we're going to work on ICAM. We need to work on data tagging. We've got some technology issues we need to work on. But we need from you, the vendor community, to work on interoperability. I just said it. You're going to have to be able to share with each other. Protect your own data first and then be able to share, because we need for you to cover your own gaps so you can help us fill our gaps, so we can defend our data and ultimately work together to defend our way of life. Sure, that's what I think.
Yep. Thanks, Colonel Kipe. I'm sure you could spend, this is a topic that you probably talk about for an entire day just on this. Amy, what are your thoughts on the challenges for the next 12 months in the world that you operate in?
So I actually took it much further than that, and I really want to build on what Colonel Kipe talked about, which is acquisition, cyber-informed engineering, looking at it from the perspective of the electric grid and where we work at the Department of Energy side and all of operational technology. It's designed to last a long time. But when something fails now, we have to have that ability to put in something that is cyber informed, that's designed to be built into a zero trust environment. And every time I have to replace something legacy with something legacy, I'm just replacing it with a vulnerability with another vulnerability. And so being able to work with the vendor community and having that ability to do our acquisition, and I think the importance of supply chain in here, really just understanding we need to take advantage of our partners, our allies, make sure that we are putting things into our system that we can trust. We have seen so many times when you look at the stand up of the FASC back in 2018, and you look at supply chain acquisition, we suddenly realized we were getting all of these different software, different hardware into our networks, into our systems that were making us vulnerable because we weren't really tracking the supply chain. And I think that we cannot overemphasize enough getting our acquisition community and the rest of our OT community, ICS community informed in these areas. You know, if you're buying an oscilloscope, that's something that's making you cyber vulnerable. You know, on the other hand, most of the time, you know, the scientist who's out there who just needs to have an oscilloscope to do their research, that's not what they're thinking. They're just thinking about, I need to do the mission. So really getting people to understand, kind of like in DoD, I was in the Army 100,000 years ago, everyone's a safety officer. You have to go with everyone's a cyber officer, right? And making sure that you're doing that fundamental cultural change. I don't expect you to be an expert in these areas. I expect you to escalate it. But, you know, every kid is taught in school, stop, drop, and roll for a fire. I've never actually had to do stop, drop, and roll, but I know how to do it. I have fire extinguishers. I have smoke detectors. I have carbon monoxide protectors. But there's a certain point when I'm going to call the fire department. And we have to make sure that we're training people today that they know, hey, if I'm getting this tool and it's any way has an electronic component in it, the first thing I should do is make sure it's going to be compliant. I love the fact we're moving into the cyber trust, just like what we did with Energy Star. And we're educating the average populace and letting them know, like, things are different. Things have changed. So I think that's fundamental. And that really goes in, you know, first of all, acquisition, supply chain, but then the second part, cultural change, training, and it has to be with the mission. So often, you know, growing up in the traditional cybersecurity world, information assurance world, we were the just say no people, and people hated working with us. It was absolutely terrible. But instead, we have to be the, how can you get the mission done as secure as possible, and a recognition that if the electric grid is not providing electricity, the mission fails, whether that's because of a physical incident like a hurricane or whether that's because of a cyber attack. And I think that it's sad and scary, but when you look at the water filtration attacks has happened like in Pennsylvania directly with Iranian hacktivists, it really highlights the vulnerability of our critical infrastructure. And we have to continue to let people know we haven't had anything that terrible happen yet, but we're only a few keyboard strokes away. And we really need to look at how to do that cyber-informed engineering, cyber-informed acquisition, and have a cyber-informed workforce.
Yeah, and that gets to what Colonel Kipe said, which is time. You know, we could study the problem forever and try to get 100% solution, or we could get to the 85% solution, get something down that buys us time and is resilient, increases redundancy, and, you know, all that stuff. So so we need to be more nimble across all of our agencies. So thank you on that. I don't want to end on a down kind of note, so I want to turn this around. Now we're going to go to the other side of the coin. This is the last section I'd like to go through all four of you with quickly. Again, I want to understand your ZT successes. I'll start off by saying that the ZT Portfolio Office started in January 2022. So in 2 months, we're going to be 3 years old. So I'll keep things in 3 years. In the last 3 years, or 2 to 3 years, can you tell me your overall assessment of how successful your agency has been with concrete examples of zero trust? And it doesn't have to be that you achieved zero trust, you know, whatever definition that is. It's what do you see as a major change in culture, technology, focus, you know, anything you want to talk about. We really want to understand some of the successes. Again, we could probably talk a few hours just on this with our panel. So I'll start off with Danielle. If you could begin with CISA, that would be great.
So I did already rattle off like a bunch of CISA's, successes are wins across the agency. And of course, we work a lot across FSEB as well. So I'll just double down on a couple other things that have been said and then turn it over. The first one is some of that culture change. There is a reason that the OT emphasis on our secure by design journey at CISA is actually called secure by demand. So everything Dr. Hamilton was just saying, that we cannot sacrifice any longer in the demand that we make for new technologies, new acquisitions, and procurement language to say, hey, the race to the bottom is no longer sufficient for the cheapest cost, quickest to deploy product. But at the same time, the other edge of that coin that was just discussed is we can't wait for the most secure, most relevant, most AI connected, enabled, things. So we have to have people that can really scrutinize that. The other thing I want to double down on is something that Colonel Kipe started to discuss around people. And of course, we have limited resources, gaps in roles and responsibilities that we need to pay attention to, but we also need to care about our people, right? And enable our people because they're not replaceable. And so we talk about upskilling, we talk about those analysts that work really hard all day, every day. We need to enable them and be cautious of operator fatigue. And I don't think that that gets talked about enough in cybersecurity because we're constantly focusing on the gaps. But that caution against operator fatigue is huge because those analysts know best what tools and capabilities they need and can maximize. At CISA, our entire team that's dedicated to that is our mission engineering team to help enable those analysts. And also capacity building, which is going out and saying, what are the data requirements that you all need to do your jobs, not just how do we write the roles and responsibilities from a leadership and a buy-in and a strategy perspective. So I think the last thing I would say is, yes, asset inventory is important, and we're rolling that out across the board, and we're doing that with supply chain principles in mind and a zero trust strategy and an understanding of known threats and vulnerabilities. But at the end of the day, also take care of your people.
That's a great point. I never thought about the fatigue aspect of it, but you're, thinking now that you said it, you're absolutely correct on that. Excellent. Amy, any thoughts? Successes?
I think that a huge success right now is, and I'm just going to highlight this panel, right? I mean, in the end, I really feel that the zero trust discussions that we have had have really led people connecting didn't connect before. And when you look at us working across the interagency, I think we're at an unprecedented level, as Colonel Kipe has brought up, working with the vendor community, with the defense industrial base, with a complete recognition that there are people out there who fundamentally want to change our way of life. When you look at October 23rd last year, the Five Eyes intelligence heads came together for the first time publicly and talked about the risks that we are facing in cyberspace with intellectual property theft. This is unprecedented. And this really needs to be one of those times in our history that we galvanize, that we work together. And I've seen that in so many different forums, in panels like this, in different working groups. I really just kind of want to highlight what came out on October 31st, which was the Zero Trust Data Security Guide for the federal government. And
that was big.
Huge, right? And then, DoD leading the way in so many different ways. There's so many more resources that DoD has than other agencies. And so often agencies have competed for resources. And it's been like a competition versus, I would say over the past, since EO 14028 came out, it's definitely been a collaboration. It's been like, how do we work together? How do we learn from each other? How do we partner together? Just the fact that DOE sent me to NDU saying we need to have this better relationship. This highlights the fact that probably the strongest thing, the successes that have come out, is these partnerships with government, industry, academia, working together for the greater good and having this kind of vision, kind of like you have that Sputnik moment of how do we get to the moon. I feel like so many of us are driving towards that success.
Yep. And it actually goes to international, the collaboration in cybersecurity. I've never seen the bandwidth of all the activity across the U.S. federal government, let alone with our allies on the general topic of cybersecurity and zero trust in particular. It's unprecedented. I totally agree. Great. Lisa, any thoughts?
I think a lot of folks have touched on them already. So there's definitely, again, so the success that we see in the collaboration when we start thinking about DoD and the FedCiv, right? Like it's such a good feeling to see that collectively, we start talking about collective operational defense, right? It's not about having one network, right? It's about everybody kind of rowing in the same direction. We're all pulling and pushing each other to keep moving, keep going, and working together, regardless of its the targets that you're looking at, whether it's a zero trust maturity model, it's still that same mindset and that same approach. I'm probably very excited about what's to come. We released that joint priorities memo, I think it was in June or July, for FY26. And as part of that, we're collecting departments and agencies zero trust updated implementation plans this month. So, and I know DoD has also collected implementation plans from across the various services too. I'm really excited to see what's in the implementation plans, to understand where agencies are, to understand where they're going, and sort of what are the gaps that we're seeing, and then how are, at least on the FedCiv side, how are they using CISA's zero trust maturity model? And then I'm excited about the work, again, that DoD is going to be doing with CISA and some other federal departments and agencies. I hope I'm not speaking too early, but looking at, again, sort of the DoD overlay of your targets and thinking about applying them to an OT environment. That to me feels like a great collaborative effort, crosses multiple agencies, and it's focused all on the same thing. How do we ensure that we're protecting the data and the information that we have from our adversaries? So lots of excitement coming. I'll probably have more successes next month. So maybe, we come back and we talk about things then.
Yeah, Lisa, and I'll say this to the folks on the call here and watching. I hope, and I truly believe, that cybersecurity is apolitical. It's not a political topic. It's neutral. So regardless of who the president is, it just doesn't matter. We're still going to be working this challenge problem because the problem is going to always be there, irrespective of what goes on in any election. So that's great. I really appreciate your view, Lisa. Colonel Kipe, you could close this out. Any thoughts on successes in the ZT portfolio office, DoD overall?
I think we have many, and it's good to keep these in mind because our adversaries are many, but our successes are also vary. So I love what Danielle said about taking care of people, and Danielle, I love that, right? Because we have a data-centric strategy. We're defending the data, but why? Why do we care about the data? Because it's about the people that we love, and we take care of the people by taking care of the data. So I love how you made that connection. I think that's a success, just that is so clear that even in this conversation, that's what surfaces, taking care of our people. I love what Amy said about the interagency effort, because reality is for any of us within the USG, right, for any of us to win, we all have to win. And I don't know that I've seen that demonstrated historically. I've been in the federal government for like 30 years now, almost 30 years. I haven't seen this. What I've seen in the past is kind of, you don't have to be awesome. You just have to be better than the other agencies. It's about defending your own network and just being a harder target and assuming that if other agencies had a less defensible network, then you were probably going to be okay because they would be attacked. But we don't see it that way anymore. We see defending the data as an interagency effort. And that's really unheard of. I think that's a win when we have these kinds of conversations and we're happy to share. The DoD came out front and first. We demonstrated some initial leadership, but we didn't just come up with a strategy and a roadmap. We also actively tried to share as much as we could with the interagency. And the interagency has been humble, and we've learned from each other's lessons. Right now, the DoD has many pilots. We have plans coming in for how the individual components are going to get to zero trust by the end of FY27. So we're winning within the DoD, but that is not that's not separate from winning across the USG and to some of our points, even you, sir, overseas with our Five Eye partners. So I think the biggest win that I would see, and I'll just close it with this, is that we're actually in an effort to achieve zero trust. I see winning as actually building trust not in users or devices, zero trust there, but building trust in a mission. And I see that as going beyond just the confines of the DoD across the USG and now our international partners within FedCiv and within the vendor community. And I think that's probably the biggest metric for success. And when you see that kind of culture change, we're building trust in the zero trust mission of defending our data and, to Danielle's point, our people. So I think those are big wins, sir.
That's awesome. Let me, if you don't mind, I'll be the fifth panel member. I see I see that we've moved out from theory to real execution across the entire federal government. That's a proud, you look across the 3 years, that's a huge movement to move a federal government in the direction and the speed that we have. And, we should look back on that and be proud of what we've done to date. It's a whole of government effort, unprecedented. The vendors have a new way of thinking about cybersecurity. It's going to take them for the next 20 years, unprecedented. We're identifying the challenges. We've talked about it here for the last 45 minutes. There are many, but we've identified them. And I feel highly confident we're going to address all of them, resolve them, and fix them and move out on this. I don't see us as a federal government stopping anything to do with cybersecurity from this point forward. And I say that because I see a realism, a renewed realism of what really is happening here with regard to cybersecurity. And so it can't be allowed to persist. And so that's why I think this is going to go for a long time, and it will be resourced. And then lastly, the big change here is we're outcome focused. All of us are outcome focused. All the strategies are outcome focused, no longer check boxes. That's huge. Federal government used to be check boxes, with the little boards and everything, pencils. No longer. It's all about the outcome. And that's a big change. So I want to thank everybody on the panel. This was really great. I think we probably went 50 something minutes, but thank you so much. You guys are awesome. You're doing great jobs. I'm honored to have moderated this panel. I appreciate the time that you gave and spending to share your knowledge, representing your agencies and missions. And I hope that we could possibly get back together, maybe give an update, maybe talk about something tangential. But you are the power players in your areas. And so I really appreciate you saying yes to be on the panel. And so with that, I'll close it out. I want to thank everybody who stayed with us to the end. And I hope this was worth it for you. If you have any questions, find a way to get in contact with any of us in our agencies, and we'll be happy to chat with you. Thank you.